December 7, 1941, stands as one of the most notorious dates in American history. But what if no one remembered it because the attack on Pearl Harbor never happened? The United States was catapulted into World War II by the attack on Pearl Harbor after taking a stance of non-involvement for the early part of the conflict. This event led to the course of history that we are all familiar with. The ripple effects of that fateful day extended beyond the Pacific, influencing alliances, strategies, and the very fabric of global affairs. But what if we could rewind the clock and explore a different narrative, one where the echoes of the attack on Pearl Harbor were never heard? In this thought experiment, we consider how pivotal moments in history might have unfolded differently. Even in the years leading up to World War II, the Japanese were aggressive in their expansionist policies in the Pacific. These ambitions were fueled by a desire for resources with oil at the top of that list, strategic positioning, and regional dominance. Even if the Japanese decided not to attack Pearl Harbor, the geopolitical tensions between Japan and the US would likely have persisted, fueled by territorial ambitions and conflicting interests in the Pacific. The absence of the Pearl Harbor attack might have delayed direct US involvement, but it does not necessarily mean avoiding conflict altogether. It is easy to imagine that the United States would have waited to enter the war until late in 1942 or even 1943. By this time, it's possible that the Navy would have been deployed around the Pacific Ocean at strategic points, leaving the Japanese more spread out and without the chance to land a decisive or surprise strike. With the size of the two naval forces, and the fact that Japan was already suffering from oil and other resource shortages, the timeline we picture still ends in a Japanese defeat, but it might have been a much less bloody affair. And it's unlikely that President Truman would have decided on the bold action of dropping the 2 atom bombs. There is even the possibility that Japan would have gotten away with taking the Philippines and other resource-rich Dutch and English colonies. The tragedy of World War I was still fresh in the American public's minds, and there was great pressure to stay out of the Second World War. Roosevelt and Truman after him may have opted for half measures, such as sending supplies and support, rather than an all-out declaration of war. Without the dramatic aftermath of Pearl Harbor, maybe the United States decides to just involve itself against Japan and limit what help it sends to Europe. Even if the United States does follow the same path in Europe, it wouldn't be until later in the war. This delay, or even complete absence from the fight against Germany, makes the war look much different. D-Day, where the United States played a pivotal role in planning and executing this massive amphibious assault on the beaches of Normandy, could have been delayed or never happened. American forces played a crucial role in preventing the German advance and ultimately pushing them back during the Battle of the Bulge in late 1944 into early 1945. Without US participation, the dynamics of this battle and the subsequent Ardennes counter-offensive might have been drastically different. During the delay, or without the United States, you must wonder how critical events like the victories in North Africa, the strategic bombing campaign against German cities and industrial targets, and the liberation of the concentration camps would have played out if they ended up happening at all. The absence of US forces in Europe would have also altered the balance of power on the Eastern Front between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. The Soviets faced the majority of German forces on this front, and the additional pressure from US forces in Western Europe influenced German strategic decisions. The pace and outcome of Soviet advances might have been impacted without the Western Allies coordinating attacks on multiple fronts. While it is unlikely that Germany would have ever conquered all of Russia, simply due to its size, Russia might have struggled to push the German advance back if they hadn't been fighting on 2 fronts. A war without the entrance of the United States might have eventually ground to a stalemate. The resulting peace treaty would see Europe left under the control of Nazi Germany to a large extent, with communist Russia maintaining a huge landmass and tons of resources. At the end of this war, there may have emerged 3 superpowers: Russia, Imperial Japan, and Nazi Germany. As scary as this seems, it very well could have happened. The last scenario that we can imagine is one where Japan, already low on resources, needed to operate a large navy. focuses on helping their allies Germany defeat Russia. This hypothetical scenario would involve a reorientation of Japanese military strategy and a potential shift in the overall balance of power on the Eastern Front. Instead of attacking Pearl Harbor, Japan might have directed its military efforts towards territories in the Soviet Far East, including areas such as Siberia and the Russian Far East. The conflict would likely involve both ground operations and naval engagements in the Pacific Ocean and adjacent seas. With Japan focusing on the Eastern Front against the Soviet Union, the pressure on Germany from the east would have been significantly reduced. This could have allowed Nazi Germany to concentrate its forces more effectively on the Western Front, crushing what resistance was left in France and England before turning its full might against Russia. While conquering Russia is a daunting task just due to the size of the landmass, in this scenario it is the Russians that are fighting on two fronts rather than the Germans. This could have left the Russians, English and French suing for peace, with a victorious Germany and Japan emerging as dominant forces. In all of the scenarios where the United States doesn't enter the war, we may have never become the superpower that we did. So much of our technology, production and economy in the 50s, 60s and on were driven by the leadership role and the need to fight the communists after World War II. Without the attack on Pearl Harbor, the sleeping giant may have never awoken at all. As we reflect on these alternate histories, it's crucial to recognize the countless variables and uncertainties that govern the outcomes of such hypothetical scenarios. History, with all its twists and turns, remains a tapestry woven by the choices of nations and individuals.